to Classical Schmassical, the anti-classical classical music podcast. Tune in every Saturday as we discuss, deconstruct, and dissect what it means to be a musician in the modern world. I'm your host, Alexa Laterno. I use any pronouns you like, and our guests this week are Wang Lu and Kelly Rourke. So just to get started, would you mind introducing yourselves a bit?
Sure, I'll go ahead. Hi, my name is Wang Lu. I'm a composer and also teach at Brown University. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here.
And my name's Kelly Rourke, she, her, hers. I am a librettist and dramaturg.
Awesome. Well, I'm so excited to have you both here, especially as your careers are so intertwined, which I'm sure we'll get to later. So just to start out, your upcoming opera, The Beekeper, will be performed by Chicago Opera Theater on March 4th. Huge congratulations on that. That's super exciting. I'm wondering if you can start out by telling us just what is the opera about and where did the idea for the story come from?
Kelly, you can start on that.
Sure. Well, you could say that it's a story about a young urban couple that inherits an orchard that has been in the husband's family for a long time. You could also say that it's a story about an orchard that witnesses a young couple coming to try to make it on the land. It really looks at a time when these two worlds come together.
Lovely.
Yes, you could also think the story as all of us live on and constantly dealing with our past.
Mm-hmm.
So different layers of time, perspectives of time and, how we experience process, emotion through different time scales. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really wonderful. How would you describe the musical landscape of something that is so time-based?
I certainly, the story we came up really together on the story gradually, we thought about two different kinds of world, at least two, or maybe more. And so I thought about music as not just being describing things, setting words, but also giving a special sound environment. Sometimes it's cold. Sometimes there's the urgency of work to do. Sometimes the lovers are lost in their moment. So there are the considerations when I was, writing music for Kelly's beautiful words. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I'm currently working on an opera as well, and it is very much playing with time. And so I love hearing the way that you've described, like using music
Thank you.
to determine, how we feel about it. Yeah.
I was just going to say, what end of opera are you working on? Are you a librettist or a composer?
Composer. Yeah.
Great.
Wow.
Yes. My librettist is just a friend of mine from my undergrad who ran slam poetry, and we did a bunch of choir pieces together. And then I came to him and I said, "Hey, do you wanna do an opera?" And he was like, "Absolutely." So now we're in the throes of it, it's super fun.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah.
We need more new operas.
Yes, new operas are amazing. I'm curious, how did each of you find your current artistic practice and how has it grown over time?
I grew up playing the piano since when I was 5, and composition since I was a teenager. And I also grew up in a family with strong Chinese music tradition. My dad started his training as a Beijing opera professional when he was like 13, very early on. And composition, it's something came to me not in the moment. All of a sudden, I thought I could be like a Mozart. Less about that, but more of already played piano for a while, and then I've been someone who keeps a journal.
Yeah.
And after talking to my piano teacher, I realized there's a connection of, actually you can write music
Mm-hmm.
and you can think about you're writing the music not for an audience, but you have access to learn the past music and already learned through performing. and how to connect and not to connect to that. I thought it was interesting. And then I went to the conservatory prep school and the Beijing Central Conservatory, and then the graduate school in New York at Columbia. So that's my path. And I think my relationship with writing music has not really changed much. It's very much like writing. A lot of pieces are autobiographical, even abstract pieces. I always had stories in my mind. So at some point, I thought maybe it's time to tell a real story from a real librettist, and see if we can work on really tell a story,
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you, Kelly?
Well, like Lou, I grew up playing the piano and went to undergrad in piano performance. But I knew pretty early on that that wasn't going to be my path. And I knew I wanted to be part of the musical world. I just wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do. And I took an internship at Glimmerglass Opera, then it was Glimmerglass Opera, in 1994. And that was a really fascinating experience for me because as a pianist, you spend a lot of time by yourself in a practice room. Not just honing technique, but figuring out what you want to have to say. And you practice, and then it's ready, and you put it before the world, right?
Yeah.
So when I got to Glimmerglass, I saw the most amazing thing, which was that you realize pretty quickly everyone in the room has spent the last year or maybe more thinking about their role in the piece. Whether they're a singer, a director, or a designer, they have worked really hard on their craft and also their point of view. But what blew my mind was they got in that room with all of their preparation and they started changing each other's minds and finding the piece together. And I thought, well, that's really cool. So that's really what sparked my interest in being in opera. And I worked around opera in some different things. I've done a lot of translations for super titles. I came in on the word end, being a dramaturg first. And there was never an abstract moment where I said I want to be a librettist. There was a moment where there was a composer who was a good friend, and we said, let's make something together. So for me, the collaboration is really where it's at. That's what excites me about the art form.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. That's actually one of the reasons that I love being a composer is because you are out there like engaging with people and I'm really happy to hear that you have had the same just lovely experience with that.
Yeah.
So, speaking more about opera specifically, can you talk a little bit about the actual process of composing an opera? Like, who starts out with the words and the music, and how do they fit together? And how do the roles or relationship between the two of you shift over the course of writing the opera?
That's an interesting story, right? We we had a few other stories before we started on this story, but they carry the same kind of allegorical nature, and they all deal with nature, and they all had strong woman in it. And then Kelly and I had a lot of Zoom meetings, and she sent me an outline, which was very important. That was wonderful. And then gradually, I already get into the world from the outline. It's designing a sound world, right? Say the environment is a suburb in the middle of nowhere, or it's Naples in Italy, or but this is not a specific place, so it gives me a lot of space for the sonic imagination. And then when the story came in, I read the story and I find those words are really, really artistically chosen because those are the words. There's so many of them you can sing, and there are not a lot of words, which is fantastic. They're right on, and you have a lot of potential to sing. To sing, to project, to do musical things. And then I highlight those moments. I literally highlight those moments. And those are the moments I want, the words to come out. And some other moments, maybe we have more instrumental stuff. And it is quite short of a timeline, which it's interesting because, you know, you're a composer, you write different kinds of music when you have 5 minutes of music and you have a whole year to think about it.
Yeah.
Or you have 1 hour and then you have 2 months,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And it kind of forces you to compose more spontaneously, which, looking back, reflects a lot of influences and things you learned has been fermenting and you're not really thinking about will come out. I think that's really, really a nice, you know, a process to reflect on.
Yeah.
And as you're a composer, you know, you just have to put notes on page.
Right.
I'm not the kind of person who'd be like, oh, you know, this and that. When it comes to a deadline like that, you have to put notes on page, very clear structure and dramatic plan.
Definitely.
And then you just have to make it happen.
Yeah.
As a librettist, you're often adapting existing stories. And so one of the fun things about this project was that the idea was to write an original story. And for me, the most fun part and the difficult part was coming up with that story. And the fun of that was spending a lot of time talking with Lu just about our interests. What kind of story did we want to tell?
Yeah.
We both were on the same page in wanting a story that really required music, not just like something that could work as a play that you put music under. We wanted something that needed music as an active part of telling the story. So we spent a lot of time just saying, oh, I like this because. We kind of come from different musical worlds, so it was wonderful to, you know, Lu would send me a piece of music by a composer I'd never heard and say, I like this thing that this composer's exploring. And I would say, oh, this reminds me of this opera that kind of does that thing. And we went back and forth for a long time. And as she said, we went through several different kinds of stories that had things in common before we landed on the final one. And by the time we got to that story and that outline, because we had spent so much time talking about our interests and how the piece was going to work, it really went quickly from there. But that first part of figuring out what kind of thing we wanted to make together was the really important and fascinating part for me.
Yeah, that's really lovely.
Yeah. Yeah, I just thought about that because then we went to the piano vocal workshop. We would adjust words, of course, and, you know, add things and taking things out. And then that was very easy for me because we agree with the personalities and the core of the story. So if this person used a different word, you know, spent more time here, it just very very natural to, you know, and flexible because it's a person, you know, it's not the person wakes up having a headache, says something different will make the person a different character.
Right.
So I often hear a story about, oh, you have to reset this or that. It was difficult changing a word or changing the line and all that. We did a fair amount of, not huge amount of revisions, but there are revisions, but I felt like it was relatively easy push. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned the workshopping process, and this is something that I'm sort of new to. So I'm really curious. When you're workshopping, there are so many room for edits and so much opportunities to make changes happen. How do you know when the work is done?
When you have a deadline.
That's fair.
I mean, you could tinker forever, I'm sure, but I find, you do it until you have that deadline that the singers need to learn it. Now I know composers and librettists who every time something is staged want to go in there and make revisions. I personally don't feel like that's the most useful thing. I feel like there is a document that I make, I'm making this for the person that I am in 2022. I hope that it will go on to a fully staged premiere, at which point we'll probably go in and make some more adjustments. But for me, once you've had the big premiere, unless there's a big mistake, I feel like you put it aside. And that's something that I made when I was that person. If it ever gets to a point where I look at it and I'm appalled, I'm more likely to say, you know what, I'm just going to put that in a drawer. Not, I want to go in and do surgery, because it's too hard to get your head back into who you were when you made a piece. So
Right.
revise.
I totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really wonderful.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things about art is embracing who you are in the moment and then having that crystallized. And, yeah.
We sometimes don't accept the time scale when you look at yourself as a teenager or like a 5-year-old. You don't remember, but that's just who you are. There's you have to accept the product of your artistic output has to detach, has to depart your body, and that's its own thing. The moment of you writing it, it's quite magical. And then once you're done, often I look at this, I'm like, how did I do this?
Yeah.
It's wonderful. You don't remember how you did it, and you restart again. And but at the core of it, what Kylie was saying, I totally agree, is that there's something you believe you've done is right. There has to be a good portion of that for you to just move on to the next project. Could be completely different, but you gain something. So I think, to me, it's not hard to say one thing is finished. But for practical reasons, things can be changed. But artistically, you know exactly where to position the work for yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
I think that ability to detach is something that's important for someone who's writing for other performers anyway. Because what we have done is not the final word. Someone is going to take that and breathe life into it. And I feel like you're not going to get a great performance if you micromanage every aspect. There are some things where you can say to a performer, I had this in mind because, and they'll take that and run with it. But I have seen writing teams kill their work by micromanaging every little performer's choice. So there's already, for me in my practice, this baked in idea that, like, I'm going to let go and see what someone else does with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did in the piano vocal workshop for one moment of the trio. The 3 characters are singing. They're imagining different future, past, and the moment. We thought it was really nice. We should have this moment extended, without hearing it. At least I didn't think that way. But then after we hear them sing, the sound travels and flows. We're like, oh. How you experience it suddenly becomes faster than you read from the page. It was like the way need longer. And then we still give them space to interpret that. Definitely not micromanaging. Yeah.
Yeah. There's definitely a certain talent in trusting your performers, who, like you said at the beginning, have spent so long in a practice room perfecting their craft and thinking about their role, and bringing themselves into the space is like the core of collaboration. So how does opera compare to other mediums within your field, such as for example, composing art, song, or instrumental music, or then writing for, say, a play or a novel? What are the differences that you've experienced?
I think people often talk about collaboration, right? It's at the core. So you're conceiving a baby together with your librettist and then the dramaturg and then the stage and everyone. But I think from a composer's perspective, also it's very important. The librettist hands you a story with its form, and you're composing a form too. So they have to work together.
Yeah.
Compositionally, their themes, their motives, their ideas, their connecting tissues. Musically had to make sense.
Yeah.
we cannot live without the words, but we cannot 100% only rely on the audience to comprehend every single word to make sense of a musical form that lasts for such a long time.
Yeah.
I think to write a large-scale work that structurally support and coexist to be the basic with the story is the challenge. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've never written a novel or a play. Um, I guess there are two big differences. One is for an opera, it's not finished, right? If I've written something that stands on the page as a complete experience, I don't think I've done my job as a librettist because I haven't left room for the composer as a storyteller. So I'm really on the lookout, both in the story and in how I construct it. Where does the composer take over the storytelling? Where does music add something that's not happening in words alone? So that's different from a novel or a play. And then the obvious difference is that an opera or a play is ephemeral. It exists in time. You can't go back and reread that paragraph. So it has to be very direct and very clear in terms of its storytelling.
Yeah.
So that's definitely different from writing. I have to say I love that it's ephemeral. I do some publication, like I do souvenir programs and CD booklets and that kind of thing. And there's nothing like the terror of sending it to the printer.
Yeah.
It's the worst because it's like, what typo have I missed? It's going to exist in print for all time. Whereas in performance, most performances, there are little mistakes. But it goes by, it's over, it's done. So I really like working in an ephemeral art form.
That's wonderful, Kelly. And you should come to the show. And the words Kelly gave me had such beauty and very clear indication of how time would pass. That's very, very important when you have a passage, like you read a passage. At least I read it, I have a sense of tempo. I have a sense of, the pacing of it.
Yeah.
Before I got into the project, I always wondered if the librettist is thinking allegro and you wrote adagio, like grand, what would happen, And, but actually, if you've been talking about the same people going through the same dramatic stories, you probably will land winning, with the wavelength. You arrive there. Yeah.
Yeah. Is reading the text and interpreting the music out of it something that you've kind of grown as a skill, or how did you develop that?
In my previous instrumental music, I do some transliteration of speech from different dialects, Chinese dialects. I love the contours of language.
Yeah.
But how just only the contour is not conveying any message, but it gives you a kind of tonality. But the grammar behind it, I try to translate that too, by, orchestrating and giving accents and calling and echoes and all that. So I've been always thinking about that, the expression of it. But this really is a first opera.
Yeah. That's so cool.
And it's amazing to me, Lou, because your text setting is at once really natural and really expressive. It's one thing, just the craftswomanship of setting text intelligibly. I'm always amazed when composers set text and the accents are kind of weird. 'Cause, they had a musical idea and the word doesn't fit. But then, so that's one level, is just making it natural and speak. But the other level is that kind of emotional flexibility and expressivity. And I just love how you've set the text and what you've gotten out of it. I heard it a certain way in my mind, but you took it in some cases to places I didn't necessarily expect. But then I thought, well, how could it be any other way?
Oh, that's so kind.
That was so much fun to hear.
That's very kind of you. I'm Chinese, Alexa. English is my second language.
Yeah.
So when I hear people talking, when I first arrived, I went to a PhD program. I didn't understand a thing. So I sat there, and then I hear language. I hear expression. I hear the tension, and I kind of get the mood. I kind of get more and more without knowing every single word. That's how I got to improve my language. I think that's part of it. Its expression comes before the words. And also, I asked Kelly to record herself reading the plot. I think it's very, very important to hear how she reads it.
Yeah.
It's like you hear many pianists playing, but I want to hear how Rachmaninoff play Rachmaninoff, Prokofiev play Prokofiev, and then you hear Ravel play Ravel. You're like, oh, they didn't really do this exaggerated romantic thing. I was like, oh, it's very nonchalant. It's just like, just happens very fast. And okay, just want to be informed and try to get, how the writer experienced it,
Yeah.
That was very helpful. That was really helpful.
Definitely.
We want to be animated, it's opera. It's exaggerated. It's performance. But there's some level of reality, right? There's magic, but also there's some reality. I'm trying to, have that there when I was interpreting. Because you want to feel for the people. You don't want to be like paper people, So, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I find linguistics absolutely fascinating as sort of a secondary interest to my music, and the way that you've combined the two is just absolutely fascinating, and I really love to see the different way that people incorporate the two, because two passions of mine. So yeah, that's really, really wonderful. Um, and I've in my sort of pre-research, I found out about the Vanguard Initiative, and I'm wondering if you can talk about how you're each involved with that and how you came into the roles that you're in now.
So I heard about the Vanguard program through my composer friends who are very active in the opera world. They said, "Oh, Lu, you should look into that and apply for this." And then I looked into it because, how do you start writing an opera? You don't just sit there and write it. Where is the story from? And then you spend your time just like write this thing nobody would look at, and then what are you gonna? I had no idea how to like even start. So I applied for this. Looks like a great program. Then I got it and I realized, okay, so it's not just this opera we're working on. It's a whole process of sitting through a lot of rehearsals and workshops and Fach classes to see, to compare similar voice types, and to also sit through libretto readings and have repertoire meetings with the conductor, Lydia Yankovskaya. It's a whole package of training you in the genre, which I think is very, very rewarding and educational, as most people don't grow up learning opera. I mean, you sometimes would go hear a show, but I grew up playing the piano. That's the closest to, but as an entire art form with different layers, I'm not from the theater. I only can hear from my father, who would talk about how every night after the performance, they would hang out the next morning, they would have a meeting to talk about what went wrong, and then the following night they would be doing it again, and how all the details, the props and all the actions, who would do what. But I didn't have that. I just, always just write the score as clear as possible, right? And then I work with musicians with limited time. There's, especially if you're writing for more people, as you know.
Right.
You pretty much have to know what you're trying to get, or the range of experiments you can do, the uncertainties. Unless you're working with a soloist, right? Or two players, or, As recently I worked with Claire Chase, that was a huge risk. I love her. And then when she asked for me, I'm like, okay, so I'm not going to just write a flute piece. I'm going to do something different. And there was a long journey of finding it. So this Vanguard Initiative is one hand is you write a new opera. On the other hand, they kept reminding you to study what has been done in the repertoire. So we're, and the reality of the singer just sound like this bass baritone, or, this particular tenor has a really high range. And what do you do if you have, a singer like that? So it's a combination, very, very enriching learning experience, especially, I've been out of school for many years. It's intense. It's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Vanguard program is really centered on these composers in residence. And I think what's really neat is that there are 2 at all times. It's a 2-year residency, and they overlap or stagger, however you want to say that. And so Lydia actually sets up for composers to interview a handful of librettists that she chooses. So it's like a little, matchmaker blind date, and Lu chose me, which I'm so happy about.
Thank you. It is very, I have to interrupt. This is impossible because I've never done this. I got to interview established librettists. I don't even know how to interview, right? It's a sixth instinct.
But besides getting to work with Lu and make this piece, the general experience of the Vanguard Initiative is so wonderful because it feels like a community of creators. So just as I came on board and started working with Lu, the piece before us started having its first libretto reading. And so I was invited to those, as were previous folks. So we're all listening and responding to each other's work. When I got to Chicago for the piano vocal workshop of this, those previous people were in the room, as is the next person, the person who's coming up after Lu. So there's this community of creators developing a shared language of talking about work in progress, which is really exciting and inspiring.
Yeah, that sounds incredible.
Yeah, I feel really lucky.
Yeah, that's really good because we get to, as Kelly was saying, I get to see a libretto reading of not my own libretto.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to sit there and see how people ask a question. So the first time when I sat there, I've never been to a libretto reading. I sat there. My reaction was, wow, the story is very obvious. It's too obvious to be a story, right? And I was like, oh, why do you even announce this person is doing this? And then gradually I realized, oh, it's different from reading a story or a novel, And then how you ask a question,
Yeah.
And to see how people, more experienced people, interact. And what the composer is trying to get out of the reading, to find helpful opinions. Those are all very, very good lessons, can only be learned that way. You can't just go to a class and learn how to. No, you can't. You just can't. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you are in a reading, what are each of you taking away from that experience, or listening for, or hoping to gain from it?
Kelly is a lot more experienced. I was very curious to see how they naturally interpret the character. Just like if I think the character is not so sad yet, I time the character to be a little bit confused maybe, and then gets really drawn into this mysterious situation, whatever. And then takes 20 minutes into that. But maybe the singer, who reads it, started with a much darker tone, then I would take a note. It's not a definitive answer to anything, but sometimes, especially experienced singers or people who have invested time into the story, give you a very spontaneous reaction. That's when I take a note.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not that of a really experienced. Kelly can talk more about what she's looking for.
No, it's the same, especially with the libretto, which is so distilled down, right? You want as few words as possible. And because I've lived with these characters and this story, I can have something on the page that feels clear to me because I have all of this other information in my brain, right? So it's very interesting to hand it to someone who's looking at it cold, who doesn't have that experience. Sometimes you learn, oh, that's coming through exactly like I intended. That's always nice. Sometimes you learn, that's not coming through how I intended at all. Let me change it. Sometimes someone does something that's more interesting than what you had in mind, and you say, oh, that character, the seeds of that are in there, and that's really cool. Let's go with that. One of the fun things for the libretto reading for this, so we have human characters and non-human characters. We have three people and three what we're calling the voices of the land. And the voices of the land, they have a very specific story and sort of a different time scale. And the words there are very sparse, very nonlinear. The idea was to give Lu something that she could play with and break apart and repeat. So we said to the people reading those voices of the land, like, be playful, you know?
Yeah.
Like, these aren't sentences for you. I didn't put a lot of stage directions because I also wanted to leave that for Lu to take in whatever direction she wanted to. So I said, be playful, you know, that's what this is about. And the previous Vanguard composer, Matthew Riccio, read one of those voices. And he took that direction. Just play, make it musical. And it was so much fun to hear where he took it. He had like all of these different attitudes and characters for these repeated words. And that was a really wonderful thing about that libretto reading. Besides just learning what needed to be clarified, you always learn a few things like that.
Definitely.
Yeah, I love what Kelly left the space for the three voices, because we also when we exchanged ideas, I talked about the strange tales from a Chinese studio. It's a lot of transformation to human form from a non-human form. It could be a scorpion, could be a snake, could be a rock, could be anything. So this three voices could be, it doesn't have a human body, but it could have characters that as human we could understand. But there are also their expressions we can only understand as human expression, but others we couldn't. But then there's music. You see, we have five senses. We understand this 3D world, but there are things probably, just out there. We could use some colors and, musical sound designs to just put it there,
Yeah. And Kelly, you mentioned repetition in the Voices of the Land. I'm wondering how each of you approach repetition, because that's something that I'm reckoning with my opera right now, is not just taking the words and saying note, 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 note. There you go. There's the words. So what does repetition look like for each of you?
I mean, for me, I feel like repetition is so important. You look back at almost any opera that still gets done today, there's so much repetition, because the thing is that opera is not, I mean, yes, there's a plot. There's always a plot, so you're following from one to the next. But it's an art form that's about emotion, and I feel like the plot is there to let us see human emotion, grief, anger, love, all of those things. But if you're paying attention to hearing every word, which can be tricky with someone using their voice their body as a resonating chamber, like, you're just concentrating too hard. So it's like, okay, give them the word, give them the story, and then sit there and repeat that for a while. If you look at a Verdi aria, you look at a Mozart aria, it's like 2 lines of text, maybe 4. And then you just wallow and you go on this emotional journey. So for me, I think repetition's really important. And I try to, I always say to a composer, repeat anything. And then I'll say, this definitely needs repetition. But, and I said that to Lou, and I remember early on, you would write me and say, can I repeat this? And I would say, yes, repeat that. I feel like repetition is underused because it's, again, opera is about emotion. And like, yes, there's plot to deliver. So deliver that plot, and then let us relax from paying attention to the plot and just get into the character's mind and heart. And the way you do that is with emotion or instrumental, not by making us hold on to a lot of new verbal information.
Yeah.
That's so well said. Yes. Definitely, when Kelly gave me space to repeat, the story doesn't stop. That's very important. Dramatically and emotionally, it keeps evolving. It's just, as she said, you're not stressed about getting the next word. So repetition is not for the sake of repetition, right? And as a composer, when we think about repetition, something has to change. I always think about variations.
Yeah.
There's no just like change or not to change. There is a threshold where you find it's a repetition, but it's not exact. Even you copy and paste the exact thing, the emotion and the story moves forward. That's the work, right? And also, like, how much do you repeat? Do you repeat a motive? Do you repeat a chunk? Some characteristic of an idea came back 40 minutes later. That's a repetition. You could show, it's a recapitulation, whatever. But that has a dramatic purpose. It cannot be just a repetition. It has to serve the function of the flow.
Yeah.
That is always I was thinking. And if you could best serve the drama without keep inventing new things, then that's where the repetition appear.
Yeah.
Right? When you keep writing quote unquote new ideas, become this whole confusing but homogeneous a thing that just keeps raining, and that's not what we're going for.
Yeah.
Yes. It also gives structure, right?
Sure. Yeah. No, that's really awesome to hear. I do want to be really respectful of both of your time. So as we're wrapping up, are there any other projects that you are working on or events that you'd like to share?
Well, I'll jump in. So I have one work in progress called Eat the Document at American Opera Project that I'm really excited about. This is another piece in a way that has two worlds. It's young activists in the 70s and in the 90s. And in both worlds, these young people, their identity is so much influenced by pop music of the time. And the book that it's based on by Dana Spiotta talks very specifically about pop songs in both times and about how they feel and how they influence the characters. So part of the fun for John Glover and I, he's the composer, is writing pop songs that do the same thing as these specific songs. And by do the same thing, I mean emotionally, right? Not like trying to ape the Beach Boys, but like what is essential in them. So I'm really excited about that. That is sort of on a longer term development scheme. And then this summer, we'll have the world premiere of something that was postponed due to the pandemic. It is a version of the Jungle Book that I'm writing with composer Kamala Sankaram, and that's going to be at Glimmerglass this summer. And then the other really exciting thing is that I have the opportunity to be part of the Vanguard program again next year, but not as a librettist, as a dramaturg.
Oh, that's awesome.
Lydia asked me to come on, and I'm going to be dramaturg for a piece by Mark Campbell and Sean Pevelo, and we actually have our first libretto reading tomorrow night.
Yeah.
So it will be fun to stay in this community of creators, working with two artists that I admire a lot.
Wow. Great. Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I have two projects. One is for the Seattle Modern Orchestra and a soprano, a large piece. And another one hasn't officially announced. It's another orchestra piece. So one with voice, one without. Bigger, large scale. Yeah.
Very, very cool. Well, thank you both so much for joining me here at Classical Schmassical. And if you at home enjoyed the show, there is plenty more where that came from, so make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you would like to continue this conversation, join the Discord linked in the description, or visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/classicalschmassical, which is quite a tongue twister. That's Schmassical, SCHMASSICAL. And remember, as always, stay classy and questionably classical.